Hi everyone, welcome to the May 24th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and Craig, the second jewel of the Triple Crown is now in the books. I think it's guaranteed this year we're going to have three different, well, I shouldn't say that. It's likely we'll have three different winners of the three different races. Rich Strike will try his hand in the Belmont Stakes, but the Derby winner did skip the Preakness. Epicenter went off as the heavy favorite, Epicenter, of course, being the Derby runner-up. But Craig, we had a new horse, a new shooter win the Preakness this year in early voting, and he was a pretty impressive one.
Yeah, I thought he ran very well, and I know we had talked about the race on both the forecast and we did a video, and neither one of us, I thought, were big fans of the supposed plan to raid early voting a little bit, but I have to say it worked out to perfection. It was a great ride by by Jose Ortiz. He was able to maneuver to the outside of the speed horse, Armagnac, and the pace was solid, nothing too crazy, and he was able to just raid off and get the job done. And yeah, nothing but hats off to Chad Brown. They obviously made the right decision, skipping the Kentucky Derby, I would say, because as a speed horse, even though he raided a little bit, I don't think he would have had very good fortunes in the Derby. Came in fresh and proved that he's just a really fast and really good horse who seems to be improving every single time out.
Yeah, early voting was definitely an impressive winner of this race. And like you said, he's improved with every start, and not just by increments, by leaps and bounds. I mean, to think that in 4 races, he's gone from that mediocre maiden win over the winter at Aqueduct to now being the Preakness winner. I mean, it is akin to when Brown and Seth Klarman won this race with Cloud Computing, but I also think it's a little bit different because this horse has brilliance to him that we didn't really see from Cloud Computing. And also, Cloud Computing had some trips in the Gotham and the Wood that suggested maybe he was better than he looked. Early voting, I mean, he's gotten pretty good trips in his prep races up until now. It just seems like he's taken a step forward with every start, and that has to make you excited about where this horse could possibly go. They've already said that they're going to skip the Belmont Stakes. Chad Brown is not going to have a starter in that race, as his Andon's also been ruled out of the Belmont as well, but they're going to give this horse a brief freshening, and I'm pretty excited to see what a horse like this can do over the summer with a couple more months to mature.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing I haven't really heard mentioned very much, and something that I'm excited about because he's definitely one of my top 3 favorite horses, is how about Gunrunner? I mean, I know he's had his praises lauded, but it's almost like it's expected now. And for him to just be pumping out top horse after top horse is pretty amazing. You don't often see this from horses that were as fast as he was to come to hand as a sire so fast, but he's got to be jumping right to the top of the list here pretty soon.
Yeah, it's a funny situation where we've had first crop sires sire the winners of the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness. We'll see if that trend continues in the Belmont Stakes, but obviously Gunrunner, a much more high-profile sire than Keen Ice, and has had a lot more success, and not a big surprise that he has a classic winner in his first crop, because the Gunrunners, I mean, it just seems like they all have ability in early voting, arguably the best that we've seen so far. I didn't remember if you mentioned he got a 128 TimeformUS speed figure for this race, just bumped up a couple points from the 126 final time number. That's a really solid number for a Triple Crown race winner, isn't it, Craig?
Yes, it is. I will have to go dig back and find some stats. But yeah, it's got to be right up there, probably in the top 10 since we've been around at TimeformUS, maybe the top 5. They do tend to get a little quicker as we move on, as you'd expect, because they're maturing. But yeah, this was a big effort. The final time figure was a 126. And I'll be honest, when I sat down to make these figures, I was a little leery because it just seemed high. A lot of horses got tops, but the card was just easy to make figures for. I mean, the only way I could consider giving it a lower figure would be to just randomly assume they made the track faster for the Preakness. And I mean, it's possible. There's a huge gap between the Preakness and the prior dirt race, just like on Derby Day. But those aren't the kind of judgments I ever want to try to make without any other evidence than 3-year-olds got better, because, you know, that's what you expect, really.
Well, what I will say about that is you had the Wood Memorial as a very fast race, and the two horses coming out of the Wood pretty much validated the numbers they got there, even Skippy Longstocking and finishing fifth in this Preakness. And also the horse who was third here, Creative Minister, who I want to give a mention to. I mean, that allowance race that he won at Churchill Downs, I know that you were kind of two minds about how fast that race could have been, and I guess it's not a huge shock that a horse like Upside with that also took a big step forward. But what did you make of the performances of Epicenter, who was second here, and Creative Minister? I know that there was some talk about the ride on Epicenter, whether or not it was the horse that caused himself to be so far back early, or whether Rosario wasn't as aggressive as people expected him to be, but it was a little bit surprising to see him 8th of 9 going by the stands the first time.
It was, and I've seen some of the tweets Andy Serling put out, and it made me go watch the race a couple times. I had already watched it a few, but I just really focused on Epicenter. And I gotta be honest, all I really see is he breaks a little bit slow, causes him to get pinched and shuffle back. But from that point on, I thought Joel Rosario did everything he possibly could, and the horse actually got a great trip from that point, if you ask me. He moved to the rail, was able to save ground around both turns the entire race. He got through on the rail. And to me, he just wasn't good enough. A lot was made that Jose Ortiz moved over to the rail kind of as a blocking move. But if you really watch, it's not like he was gaining much on him anyway. So I don't think that made any difference whatsoever. And personally, I just think he was the second best horse. Could he have been closer? Maybe, I guess, but there's no guarantee if he's sitting 4th, 3 wide around the turn, that he's going to run a better race. So that's how I see it. I think the top 2 were the 2 best horses, and I don't really have any problem with the result. I'm not one that thinks Epicenter was much the best. Maybe I'm jaded because, both of us were a little lukewarm on him. We thought he was a very good horse, but not deserving of being a heavy favorite against this group, and that's kind of how it played out.
Yeah, I think the points that we made about him before the race were correct. He was a little bit overrated off that Kentucky Derby performance when people kind of misunderstood the parts of the race where he actually ran fast compared to the leaders. And not that he ran badly in the Derby, he was the best horse in the Kentucky Derby, but that did not make him a clear standout among the entire 3-year-old crop. And not a big surprise that he lost here. I thought he ran really well, though. I mean, he was a good second in this race, and assuming that he does still possess that early speed, if he's able to break a bit more sharply, it's nice to know that this horse has the versatility to come from as far back as he did in this Preakness and arguably run the best race of his life, and also to go towards the front end like he did earlier in the year. So I think Epicenter didn't lose anything in defeat in this Preakness. He also was just the second best horse, as you said. Early voting ran a better race. If you look at the TimeformUS Pace figures, which I think is pretty instructive, you'll see that the half mile is color-coded in red. Some people might perceive the Preakness pace as being on the slower side because of that 24 plus opening quarter mile, but I'm sure Craig, there's not a whole lot of run up for this mile and 3/16 distance of the Preakness at Pimlico, and just go and compare the fractions of this race to the Pimlico Special, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that was run on Friday. The Preakness pace was much faster than that race, so really no problem with me saying that early voting was just simply the best horse.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point actually about Epicenter, and that he was a speed horse. We saw it in Louisiana. He was nipped trying to go wire to wire early. I think it was in the Lecomte, and then next time out he did go wire to wire, and we were all surprised when he was rated in the Louisiana Derby. And I wouldn't be surprised if that doesn't have an effect. He was rated in the Kentucky Derby, he was rated in the Louisiana Derby. So it shouldn't have really been a big surprise that he dropped back. And I just wonder if maybe that helped, not help, but if it led a little bit to him breaking a little bit slower, because they basically trained him to not be as keen early.
Yeah, I think that's a really astute observation. Sometimes horses, when you focus so much on changing their running styles actually do shift, and they don't have the early speed that they once possessed. Often horses are trained to be more aggressive out of the gate earlier in their careers, and when that's not as much of a focus, they can lose it over time. So we'll see if Epicenter's able to reclaim that early speed. I'm a little disappointed to see that he's not running in the Belmont Stakes. I get it. It's a tough campaign. There's no real reason for him to run 3 times in 5 weeks, but the Belmont just the way it's coming up, it seems like it would be a race where he could really, reap some benefits from winning, but he's not going to participate there. And like some others, they'll concentrate on races later in the year. Before we move on, just quick mention to the filly Secret Oath. I thought that she ran fine. I don't have a whole lot to say about her performance. Not a big surprise that she was coming from last place, but she ran a similar speed figure to her Kentucky Oaks, just she wasn't quite good enough.
Yeah, if anybody had a tough trip, I would say it was her. She kind of found herself way back and then kind of made that premature early wide move. And she actually got right into contention, but just didn't have a finishing kick, which isn't a surprise after that trip.
Speaking of the 3-year-old fillies, we can transition right into the feature race from Friday's card, the Grade 2 Black-Eyed Susan. And I should mention, we're going to go through as many stakes as we can from Pimlico over Friday and Saturday. We'll skip a few that didn't earn particularly noteworthy speed figures, but we'll try to touch upon most of them. And that Friday feature was the Black-Eyed Susan going 1 1/8, a little bit shorter than the Preakness. And Craig, it was a nice rebound from Interstate Daydream. She looked like a different horse than the one that we had seen about 5 weeks prior in the Ashland, just much more aggressive, up on the pace this time, and she was able to take over from Beguine, who really threw in the towel in the stretch and gamely held off the closers.
Yeah, I thought this was a very nice effort from her. As you said, her Ashland she just kind of had packed it in, ran an okay third, but she really progressed nicely here. She got a 1:15 speed figure for the win. She ran down Adair Manor, who I think went off the morning line favorite. It was her third start with 3 different trainers. Not sure what kind of effect that had, but she just didn't seem to be the same horse that we had seen a couple starts back in California. Maybe she was riding a speed bias that day. But she's a pretty talented filly, so I don't want to take anything away from Interstate Daydream. It looks like just a 3-year-old who took a really nice step forward to me.
Yeah, and maybe it was back a little bit too quick when she ran in the Ashland. I've seen that offered up as an excuse. She was coming back, I think, just 26 days after that allowance victory at Oaklawn Park in March, which we had talked about at the time was very impressive. I didn't think either of us believed she was beating much that day, but she certainly did it like she would be a horse that could eventually win graded stakes, and she was able to take that step forward here. I didn't see any excuse for Adair Manor. She got a good stalking trip, just really never got on terms with Interstate Daydream. She was hard right in from about the half-mile pole home and was able to find enough to hold on for second and grind away for that position, but she never really looked like she was ever getting there. And this was a race that didn't feature a whole lot of changing of position. The pace was pretty even throughout. We didn't see a big late move from the back of the pack. I guess maybe you give some credit to Radio Days for closing up the inside from 10th to get up for third in this race, but it just wasn't a race where we saw big movements or horses making big late pushes from the back of the pack. And with that, I should talk a little bit about the way the track was playing on Friday and Saturday. I saw a lot of chatter that there was a big speed bias on both days at Pimlico. On the NBC feed in particular, they were talking about that quite a bit. Looking through the results in retrospect, Craig, I'm not sure that I necessarily saw a huge speed bias.
No, I would agree. I was kind of taken by surprise by all that talk because I watched all the races for 2 days. I didn't pay a lot of attention to the commentary, and speed bias never really crossed my mind. It didn't jump out at me. We do have the Saturday coded in pink, which means I guess a lot of speed horses won, but when you look through the charts, I don't think any of them were big surprises. A lot of them were really solid contenders, if not favorites. So to me, it just looked like your typical dirt track where speed and the rail can be an advantage if you take advantage of those things. But I think it was a fair track. I didn't see anything too overtly biased, in my opinion.
Brad Cox, the trainer of Interstate Daydream, he also had a graded stakes winner on Saturday at Pimlico in the Dinner Party Stakes, and obviously this was a week of mixed revelations for Brad Cox with that news coming out about him having a drug overage in the Stephen Foster from last year. Just don't want to go without mentioning that since it was a big story in racing this week. Obviously, a Butte overage is not some big smoking gun. I mean, it's not a big revelation that some trainers use Butte in training, but that was something that is important because it happened at Churchill Downs, and Churchill Downs took such a big stand with Bob Baffert last year with that that overage of Medina Spirit in the Kentucky Derby. So we'll see how they decide to handle that as a private entity. But as far as Brad Cox's results at Pimlico go over the weekend, they were pretty positive, Craig, with this other graded stakes victory in the dinner party. And Set Piece, the winner here, overcame a pretty slow to moderate pace to get the job done.
Yeah, he ran a very nice race, I thought. On paper, he kind of looked like the class horse coming in. His minor's mark, I would say, was a little bit dull, though he was, pretty wide all the way around there, and he sure rebounded nicely here. It was a big figure win from him. I want to say it was like a 126, forgetting off the top of my head. But yeah, it was a 126, and a lot of that was because of the pace he overcame. He was, I believe, dead last early on and way back, and I was actually worried about him about midway on the final turn, thinking he's just dull. And all of a sudden, he kicked in and just ran by them all like they were standing still. So, pretty big effort from him. I mean, this was a pretty weak grade 2 in retrospect when you look at the field, but I would imagine they have bigger targets moving forward because he looks like he's in good form again.
I feel like we've said that about Set Piece before, though. I mean, he's tried some Grade 1 races in the past and hasn't really lived up to expectations. I feel like he's the kind of horse that looks so impressive when he beats up on lesser competition, but sometimes doesn't produce that same effort against the best out there. We'll see if that changes, because this was among the best performances that we've seen out of him, especially the way that he overcame that pace. And he was beating some good horses in Tango, and especially Atone, who had done some good work for Mike Maker earlier in the year. They both got good trips right on top of that pace, and Set Piece just ran them down. I mean, if there was one horse that was maybe a little bit unlucky, it was the 4th place finisher Beacon Hill, who had some trouble extricating himself from traffic at the top of the stretch, but he was never going to be any threat to Set Piece.
No, I would agree. He did have some trouble, but this is probably about where he belongs. He runs grade 2 type figures at best, so I wouldn't overrate that trouble too much for me.
Now, getting back to the dirt, I guess one of the horses that ignited that speed bias debate, or at least intensified it on Friday, was Super Quick, who won the Allaire DuPont Distaff Grade 3 event for the fillies and mares, because this did look like a speed favoring kind of performance, the way she went to the front, traveled so strongly, everybody else chasing her came off the bridle early, and she just ran away from this field in the stretch. Though it's not like this was the strongest race going in, and she took a big step forward. It just felt like nobody else did.
Yeah, maybe I'm a little biased because I really, really liked her in this spot. So now I won't say I expected her to win off by 14 lengths. That would be ridiculous. But I really thought she had this field over a barrel. I was surprised that she wasn't favored in here, and she just had everything her own way. She was the lone speed in the race by a mile. I'm pretty sure the pace projector had a pretty big gap between her and the second horse, and she was also probably the best horse. So when you give the best horse, also have a huge tactical pace advantage, these are the kind of things you can get. I wouldn't say it was a biased track. It was just ideal circumstances for her where the field wasn't very good. She was lone speed. She was able to get out front by quite a bit, and it was just a canter for her.
Yeah, she's a horse that had shown some ability in the past, had looked pretty impressive winning against some weaker competition, I think at Churchill Downs last year, but hadn't really stepped up against the top competition, and she wasn't doing so here. This was not a strong graded stakes affair, but she ran the kind of speed figure that suggests that she might be up to the challenge of tackling tougher now, that she's a more mature horse. I believe she's a 4-year-old. I was a little bit surprised watching this race that Florent Giroux rode her as hard as he did. I mean, he was whipping and driving her coming to the 16th pole like he had horses nipping at his heels, and maybe he didn't look under his shoulder to see that he was over a dozen legs clear. You don't often see that. Typically, you'd expect horses to be eased up a little bit, but that's another reason why she might have run such a fast speed figure, because she was really ridden hard to do it. It's not like this was some easy win for her, even though she was much the best.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make. We often hear about horses who could have run faster because they were under a hold coming to the wire and things like that. Well, this was not one of those horses. The 123 that she ran, that was the best you were going to get out of her on Saturday or Friday.
Sticking with the fillies and mares, but moving over to the turf course on Saturday, we saw the Grade 3 Gallaret one, and no surprise, this was won by Chad Brown. It seems like any graded stakes for the fillies and mares on the turf this year goes to Chad Brown's corner, and technical analysis, I would say not even among the 5 best fillies and mares that he has in this division right now, but nevertheless, she was an easy winner of this race going to the front end, and clearly benefited from the fact that there was no other pace in the race.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have a ton to add about this race. I mean, she was 3-5. She, similar to the last race, she had the field over a barrel. There was no other speed. She was the best horse on paper by a pretty good margin, and she took full advantage. She got a 121 speed figure for the effort. She had run 120 last time, so no real surprise there.
Yeah, I'm forgetting. I'm not looking at the chart right now. Was there a big pace upgrade for this race, or not so much because she was the one setting the pace?
Yeah, no, there was no pace upgrade. The final time was a 119. She got a couple points extra because of how fast she finished. We don't give a whole lot when you're the actual leader in those spots. But yeah, even though all the fractions are in blue, there was no pace upgrade for this race.
I do think you made a rare pace upgrade on the dirt. We don't usually see that. It's more of a thing on the turf. But in the next race, we're going to talk about one of the races on Friday's card, the Grade 3 Pimlico Special. This one run over the same distance as the Preakness, a mile and 3/16. Just a big dichotomy in the way the paces shook out comparing this race to the Preakness. Much slower in the early going. I think I wrote it down. The half mile of the Pimlico Special went 2.36 seconds slower than the Preakness half mile. So they were just crawling up front, and it turned into a sprint to the wire. And First Captain, he had the best delayed kick of them all.
Yeah, he was impressive, and you're correct. This one did get the P notation because it was a slow race final time-wise, and the pace is exactly the reason why. I mean, there was just no way they couldn't finish any faster than they actually did finish the race. I want to say it was very much a sub-12 by First Captain, so I don't know how much faster he could possibly run to the wire. So that's why we got that here. He wound up with a 118 figure, just because it kind of fit everybody else in behind him, kind of put them where they normally run, at least in the vicinity. And I thought it was a really impressive performance. I didn't like First Captain at all in here. He had never really run a fast race, even though he won the majority of his races, but as Shug McGaughey horses are prone to do, he took a big jump up, and he just seems to be progressing and maturing. They've taken their time with him, and he finally found a good spot. And for me, I thought he was just really, really good in this spot. The others behind him, not so much. Maybe it was a case of just going too slow and keeping everybody else around. Untreated set that slow pace, still wasn't able to hold him off. Vindictive had a jump on First Captain, but once he got rolling, he was just clearly faster than everybody else through the lane.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought both of the Todd Pletcher runners, Vindictive and Untreated, got fantastic trips in this race. They both saved ground. Untreated was setting that slow pace. Vindictive was just following him around the racetrack, and you would have thought Vindictive was odds-on to win this race when they came into the stretch, because he tipped out like he was going to roll by the other Pletcher trainee. But First Captain, I mean, he was under a strong drive from Luis Saez, but he really responded, and he just kicked it into another gear in the final eighth. And it's kind of a funny horse, Craig, because he's got this pedigree that says he should want to run all day. The kind of pedigree that said if he had developed a bit earlier, he could have been in the Belmont Stakes as a 3-year-old, being by Curlin, his dam, America, who was, I think, bred by Bobby Flay and raised by Bobby Flay. She was a horse that wanted to run all day. I think she ran some of her best races going a mile and an eighth, a mile and a quarter. But for whatever reason, from the start of First Captain's career, they kind of kept saying they were afraid about stretching him out. They thought maybe he was more of a one-turn closing horse. Well, maybe not, because he got to go the mile and 3/16 here and seemed to be getting stronger and stronger as the race went on, and maybe he's just kind of running into his pedigree, and he's going to appreciate these races going a mile and a quarter in the future, like potentially the Jockey Club Gold Cup later in the year at Saratoga.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out he didn't run very well at all last time, as you mentioned. I mean, 1 turn, 7 furlongs. It kind of makes sense in retrospect, but that's just kind of showing how good Speaker's Corner is, because he was 19 lengths behind. We've already had a couple of horses come back to win out of that race, so that was a strong race in any case. And yeah, I think distance is what this horse is going to win. I would be very surprised if we see him in any more 7 furlong races.
Moving on to a race from Saturday's card, going much shorter than the Pimlico Special. The Grade 3 Maryland Sprint, going the 6 furlong distance, was won impressively by Jackson Traveler. Craig, if this race were run last year, we would have said a 1:18 TimeformUS speed figure might put this horse in the conversation to be among the best sprinters in the country, but not so this year. We actually have a pretty deep sprint division, and this Jackson Traveler performance, it was okay, but it was decidedly a Grade 3 performance.
Yeah, I agree. He got a 1:18 speed figure. He's a horse who's run very well at Pimlico over the years for Steve Asmussen. Over the years, I mean, he's 4 years old, but I think he's won 3 out of 4 with the second, so he does like Pimlico. He had things his own way. We have all the fractions coated in blue. This one actually got a little bit of a pace upgrade as well because the pace was definitely on the slow side. And when you look at the fractions, keep in mind this Pimlico track was pretty quick this weekend for Pimlico. So a 22.95 normally at Pimlico would seem about average. You'd see a lot of 23s there because they have basically no run up for the 6 furlong races, but it was a quick track. So that 22.95, basically the race was over after the half mile. The real disappointment here, I guess, was Disco Faro, who was vying for favoritism, wound up finishing last. He had run 2 big races, that big maiden win, and then won a stakes next out in Maryland, but he just had nothing. So I have to assume something went wrong with him.
Yeah, Disco Faro did not get off to a particularly alert start, was out of position right from the beginning, and when you're trying to play catch-up in a situation where there's a horse controlling up front that might be the best horse anyway in a slow-paced situation, is just not going to work out for you, but he really had nothing. He backed up through the pack and finished last in here. Jackson Traveler ran fine. He's a pretty nice horse. I will say he's coming out of an allowance race, or I should say his prior race was an allowance runner-up finish at Aqueduct that might be a pretty strong race worth following, because the horse that beat Jackson Traveler that day, Mr. Phil, came back on Sunday at Belmont Park and won an allowance race that I believe must have come up pretty fast. I don't think that you put out the speed figures for Sunday yet, Craig, but that's when I would want to know what figure Mr. Phil got, because I think he ran pretty well also, and he actually beat Jackson Traveler, who came back to win this graded stakes. So maybe just a strong race that both of them were coming out of.
Yeah, I'll have that figure later today. I'm a little behind this week due to, being a bit under the weather. But I will be all caught up today, and we'll post my usual figure list later this afternoon.
Keep with those 6 furlong sprints for a little bit and go back to Friday when they ran the Grade 3 Miss Preakness for the 3-year-old fillies. And Craig, the winner of this race, Lady Scarlet, it's like she picked up where she left off when she won that Cicada so impressively at Aqueduct. I guess I don't know what happened to back in the Beaumont, but maybe that just flatters Monterey, who was the impressive winner that day, as Lady Scarlet got back to her best form to win here.
Yeah, she was really good. And of course, that Monterey was run at 7 furlongs and not just at the about 7 furlongs. So it might be a combination of just being a little too far for her and also running into Monterey, who's obviously really good, having come back to win the 8 bells, doing so in fast time. So I would tend to lean that maybe that horse was just a little too good for her. But she's no joke, Lady Scarlet. She is quick, and when she's able to meet a field like this, she does just fine. She ran a 110 speed figure here. She had run a 111 in New York 2 back. So just a really good effort from her. She seems to be one that likes to just track the pace a couple lengths off, sit outside. So maybe that had something to do with that performance in the Beaumont as well, as she found herself on the lead, because her best races have come from that tracking wide position.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. She did find herself a little bit unexpectedly as the clear pace setter in the Beaumont 2-back, and all of her other victories, I think she's won 3 of her last 4. They've kind of come with that stalk and pounce style like she showed in this Miss Preakness. So maybe that's just the key to success with her, to take her a little bit off and make that run around the far turn into the stretch. But yeah, she was a visually impressive winner of this race. She really ran through the wire and was superior to horses like Happy Soul and Gimmick. I didn't see a big excuse for the odds-on favorite here, Happy Soul, Craig. I mean, she was turning back to a more appropriate distance than what they tried in the Ashland 2-back, but she just seems like she's one that hasn't really taken that step forward.
No, she was one of those. I I mean, I could see her being favored. I just didn't get the 4-5 or 3-5 or whatever she wound up being. She just didn't have the past performances to back that up. Maybe it's all the run happy commercials. I don't know, but she was definitely overbet. She ran fine. She ran speed figures similar to what she normally runs in sprints. I think this was her second best one, but yeah, there was no excuse. It's not like the pace was super fast. She just got some pressure from Gimmick, and maybe it was a little bit too much. She wasn't able to get the job done.
Let's finish up some of those stakes from the Saturday card, going back to the Jim McKay turf sprint. This was the one that was run right before the Preakness on the turf, going 5 furlongs. Won, no surprise, by Karatari, who was bet down to be the substantial favorite in this race. And this horse is just always tough to beat when they go that 5 furlong distance on the turf. The shorter they ride them, the better Karatari is.
Okay, before we go another step, David, I got to tell you, whoever put this rundown together today is fired. Because we have jumped back and forth from Friday to Saturday to Friday to every single time, and it's wearing out my clicker. For those listening who don't know, it was me. So I'm firing myself and handing the reins back to David. Not sure what I was thinking.
Yeah, I asked Craig for a favor to put together this one, and yeah, I guess he kind of did it by the descending speed figures, but yeah, there's a little bit back and forth.
Yes, I didn't put enough thought into that, but that said, there's not a lot to say about Karatari. He was the best coming in on paper. I know we both thought he kind of had this field at their mercy. Once he broke clean and made the lead, the race was basically over. He got a 120 speed figure, which is right up there with the best he's run in his career. It might even be a career best by a point or two. So good effort by him, back in top form. He had been away for a few months, but it didn't seem to deter him even a little bit.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. He was just better than these horses. I thought that Smoke and Jay made a nice run at him to get up for second, but you could tell once Karatari felt his presence, he was kicking on again, and just the best horse on the day. Another sprint stakes that they ran on Saturday was for the 3-year-olds, the Grade 3 Chick Lang, going 6 furlongs on the dirt, kind of the counterpart to the Miss Preakness run the day before. And Craig, we had talked about a lot of possibilities when we handicapped this race on the forecast last week. We both kind of concurred that the biggest price of the ones we talked about could be Lightning Larry, who had the speed figures to be competitive, and Lightning Larry, well, sometimes the best value does win. He got the job done at 12-1, but I would say both of the top 2 finishers here, he and Cogburn, ran big races.
Yeah, these were very big races. It's easy to forget these are 3-year-olds, and they ran faster than we saw the older horse Jackson Traveler run. He got a 118. The winner here got a 120 figure, and the runner-up actually got a 122 for setting that fast pace on the day. So, yeah, for 3-year-olds, these are some pretty serious sprinters. I know you liked both of these top 2 horses, and I thought they both ran really well in here, and I mean, this is the one race out of all of them I would have watched and thought maybe the track was favoring speed, but I'm more just thinking these are 2 really good 3-year-old sprinters because there was quite a gap back to 3rd place. So I think it was more the talent of the horses than any speed bias.
Yeah, I mean, I get that viewpoint that maybe the track carried them a little bit, but I didn't see so many lopsided results that would make me think that it was a huge factor. It might have been a minor factor, and that's kind of what the color coding in TimeformUS indicates with that light pink, saying that it was a slightly speed favoring surface. Craig, though, I do want to talk about the opening quarter of this race. I can't remember the last time that I saw a sub 22 going 6 furlongs at Pimlico, and I mean, the reason why that's so surprising is, isn't there like no run up for these races at all?
Yeah, they listed at 5 feet. I guess that's what it is. It's not very much, whatever it happens to be. The last time I can remember a super fast quarter like that would have been Kofefi. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was really eye-opening. And I want to say hers was not sub 22. I mean, yeah, I think it was just above sub 22. And that one had a lot of people opening their eyes, wondering where that came from. So that just tells you how fast that 2187 is at Pimlico. That's something I'll have to dig into the database. And I won't be surprised at all if that's not the fastest quarter that I have.
And I'm sure you remember that day Kofefi ran was a really souped up fast track. I think she went 107 and change. I mean, this track was fast on Friday and Saturday, but it wasn't as fast as that day. So, I mean, they were really motoring up front, especially Cogburn, to achieve that opening quarter here. And he held on well for second. It's not like he ever threw in the towel. He only lost to Lightning Larry by 3/4 of a length. These two were just much the best in the Chick Lang. Let's talk about one more race from, I believe, Saturday at Pimlico, the Hilltop for the 3-year-old fillies on the turf. This one won, no surprise, by Pizza Bianca, who was the heavy favorite. Craig, some chatter about this one maybe setting up for a run at Royal Ascot if Christophe Clement decides to ship her over. I don't know if this performance necessarily gives me that kind of confidence, but she was better than these horses.
Yeah, she was. I kind of made a joke about that, and our buddy Marcus Hirsch, our co-worker, joked because I said, a horse beating someone named Murph in the stretch doesn't exactly scream Royal Ascot to me. And Marcus kind of made a joke about going to Ireland instead because of Murph. But yeah, Pizza Bianca was fine. She got a 105 speed figure, but I don't see the point of going to Ascot. I would hope they wouldn't, because she would not be a contender, in my opinion. It's just a huge gap from this stakes horse, listed stakes race at Pimlico, to Royal Ascot.
Craig, I'm doing like some navigation right now. Can you remind me, was this race on Friday or Saturday? I think it might have been Friday.
Yes, this race was definitely on Friday.
Yeah, I'm just navigating to the chart right now. Yeah, it was race 9 on Friday, because I want to make the point when I'm looking at the data. If you go and watch this replay, Pizza Bianca was never 16 lengths behind like the chart shows. I don't know what the chart callers were doing in this race or what. I mean, it seems like they just exaggerated every margin, but she was never more than 10 lengths off the pace, and it's messing with her pace figures a little bit. So just be aware of that. Craig, you might want to go watch it for yourself. I don't know if you ever make those kinds of adjustments, but I think the chart callers just went a little bit overboard with over-exaggerating the margins between horses in this race.
Yeah, I'll bring that up to Equibase. They're good about looking into these things when we let them know. Yeah, I'm not sure. That could just as easily be a typo, to be honest. I'm not sure. I'll address that with them, and I'm sure it'll get fixed.
Well, that's all the stakes action we're going to mention from Pimlico in detail. I think we covered almost everything, Craig. We might have skipped over the Sir Barton. It's not a race that got a particularly fast speed figure. I guess I'll just briefly mention the fact that Ethereal Road, who won that race, could be coming back in the Belmont Stakes, but based on the speed figure he got, maybe not a major contender. But I feel like we covered all of the top performances from Pimlico over the weekend. Just a couple more races on this rundown to talk about that both earned 120 plus TimeformUS speed figures at different venues on the turf. One of those was the Seek again at Belmont Park, the feature race on Sunday. And I think this is just an approximate fig from you, Craig, but even though he was only beating 2 horses, Mason, who won this race, certainly did it the right way.
Yeah, he did. He wound up with a 126 speed figure. It's not a pace-adjusted speed figure or anything like that. Now, of course, in a 3-horse field, you don't have to worry about losing ground or traffic or anything like that, but he ran fine. He had a target up front, and Wolfie's Dinah Ghost, who seemed to just be out for exercise. I guess they were just picking up an easy part of the purse. So it was basically a match race, but the way he handled the other runner, he's back. He's in top form, and that kind of figure is going to make him a contender in bigger races this year.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was disappointing to see only 3 horses go postward in this race. I don't know what the story was, if the other 2 ever planned to run. This was a race that was supposed to be contested Saturday. It didn't fill, and they were able to make it fill on Sunday. So yeah, I don't know if those 2 that scratched actually were going to run ever, but yeah, Mason did beat the 2 that lined up against him. He is a grade 1 quality horse that was just beating runners that are not in the same league as him. He was very impressive. The turf courses at Belmont did take a little bit of rain over the weekend, or at least coming into the weekend, and that might have helped this horse a little bit as well with that European pedigree that he's got. He just seemed to really relish it out there, and he is good. They'll probably target a race like the grade 1 4-star Dave over the summer, and you'd have to imagine if he holds this form, he's going to be tough in a spot like that.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, he had run a 128 last time against when he lost by a nose to Cheryl Spate. who in the Maker's Mark. So yeah, that is a grade 1. He's a good horse. My one question is how far he wants to go, but what we've learned is he'll be fine going a mile.
Let's finish things up with one more stakes on the turf from this past weekend, also on the East Coast at Monmouth, which has gotten their meet underway this month, I should say, and that was the Get Serious Stakes, going 5 furlongs on their grass course on Sunday. And Craig, the question that I have for you is, how did the Critical Way go off at 4-1 in this race? Because I'm just doing a quick scroll through the PPs, and wasn't he kind of a standout?
He was, if you could look past that eased line, and I see no reason not to look past it. I mean, they brought him back. He's been working fine ever since then. His last workout was a first of 58 on the dirt at Monmouth. So it was pretty obvious to me whatever was wrong with him was, that caused him to be pulled up that day at Tampa. He was back, and he kind of towered over this field. So yeah, that was a bit puzzling to me, and he showed that even at 8 years old, he is still in top form. He's going to get about a 123 speed figure for the effort, and I imagine we're going to see him in these 5 furlong turf stakes all over the East Coast this summer.
Yeah, this is a horse that quietly had a big year in the turf sprint division last year. I know he didn't win the top races out there. He didn't make it to the Breeders' Cup turf sprint. But he won, I think, 3 stakes in a row last summer, including the Get Serious. This is the second year in a row he's winning this race. He just lost that Jim McKay in 2021, that feature race. That sprint race that we just talked about, Karatari winning. He was second in the previous edition of that race. So the Critical Way, he's a good horse, and seems like coming off that layoff, whatever went wrong at Tampa is behind him, because he was pretty impressive winning at Monmouth on Sunday. And like you said, if they decide to target some tougher spots, he certainly has the speed figures to compete against some better horses.
Yeah, and just one note about that. The horse that went off the favorite, Yes, I Am Free. I know it's something you and I harp about, but he was a horse who was beating up on horses in those 5 furlong sprints at Gulfstream, and that's just a different world there. So bet those Gulfstream Park turf running lines at your own peril when they ship further north.
Yeah, but both he and Belgrano were coming out of those races, and they each took money in this race and just were not able to replicate that form. And we've talked about that quite a bit. That Gulfstream Park turf course, it's like a paved highway sometimes, running the 5 furlong distance. And some horses love it, some horses don't. And getting over a truer turf course, let's say, you typically see some different results. Well, Craig, that's all the racing to recap this week. We've got those first 2 legs of the Triple Crown in the books. The Belmont Stakes, we'll do a more in-depth look at it, I'm sure, on future podcasts. It's not coming up as the strongest field. Like I said, we will have Rich Strike in there, a few others from the Derby, among them Mo Donegal, who I know a lot of people like to go that 1.5 mile distance. We the People, who was the impressive winner of the Peter Pan. But a lot of the major players from the Derby and the Preakness will not be running back.
No, but one thing we know about Belmont is even if the Belmont's not as strong as we hope it would be some years, the card's going to be awesome. So the Belmont Stakes Day has become almost like a mini Breeders' Cup, a mid-season Breeders' Cup day, with just, we know we're going to get all the best horses. So I can't wait. It's just a little under 3 weeks away at this point, and I'm sure there'll be some good racing in between, but it's one of my favorite days of the year, so I can't wait.
Yeah, fingers crossed, as long as Flightline and Speaker's Corner stay healthy and face off in that Met Mile. The Belmont might be an undercard stakes on that day to the Met Mile, because that'll be the headline attraction for a lot of racing fans. Well, everybody, that's everything for this week on the podcast. Remember, you can always catch these TimeformUS podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Craig, thanks as always, and all of you, remember you can catch the TimeformUS forecast when we come back to do some handicapping later in the week.